Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are exploring a franchise that quite literally changed the face of gaming forever. We're going to look at how a massive gamble, a 1996 console game heavily inspired by a retro 1989 title called Sweet Home, mutated over the decades into Capcom's absolute crown jewel. It's a masterclass in adapting to survive, and we're going to trace that entire incredible journey right here, right now. Okay, let's dive right into this because this number is just, well, it's staggering. 201 million. As of March 2026, that is the total number of units the Resident Evil franchise has sold globally. To put that into perspective, this massive figure makes it the single most successful series in Capcom's entire history when we're talking about software sales. But a number this big, it doesn't just happen overnight, and it definitely doesn't happen by playing it safe. Which brings us to the central mystery of our explainer today. How did a game about a single, creepy mansion turn into an unstoppable, multi-decade phenomenon? Seriously, think about it. How did a localized story about a specialized police unit, the STARS Alpha Team, searching for their missing comrades, spark a narrative that would span the entire globe and completely redefine how we experience fear in media? Let's get into Part 1, Origins of Survival Horror. Now, to answer how this whole phenomenon started, we have to dial the clock way back to the very first era of the franchise. It was 1996, and designers Shinji Mikami and Tokuro Fujiwara crafted something entirely unprecedented for the original PlayStation. They took elements like a haunted mansion setting, cryptic puzzles, and even those incredibly iconic door loading screens from Sweet Home. But here's what's really interesting about this. They didn't just participate in a genre. They actually coined the term survival horror itself. The game forced you into a state of constant, nerve-wracking vulnerability. By using these fixed camera angles against pre-rendered two-dimensional backgrounds, the creators cleverly hid terrors just out of sight. You were literally forced to manage your extremely limited ammo while desperately searching for the next safe room. And the lore built so rapidly from that original foundation. The Umbrella Corporation's catastrophic T-virus completely decimated the Midwestern town of Raccoon City in just a few short months. It's a truly chaotic timeline. It all kicked off in the Arklay Mountains in July 1998 with the events of Resident Evil 0 and the first game. By September, the outbreak had consumed the city entirely, turning the everyday population into flesh-eating zombies during Resident Evil 2 and 3. And then, by October, game over. The government wiped Raccoon City completely off the map with a nuclear strike just to contain the infection.
Moving on to Part 2, the Action Revolution. So to survive changing market trends in the gaming industry, the traditional survival horror formula needed to fundamentally mutate. And this brilliantly illustrates the shift. The classic 1998 enemies were those slow, mindless T-virus zombies that defined the early era, right? Now, contrast that with 2004's Resident Evil 4, which introduced the Ganados. Infected by the ancient Las Plagas parasite, these new enemies were aggressive, they were fast, they were intelligent, and they were fully capable of using weapons and coordinating attacks together. The threat evolved from something you could just awkwardly run past in a hallway to something that actively, relentlessly hunted you down. Titles like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 completely reinvented the mechanics. They pioneered the over-the-shoulder camera, which, let's be real, practically became an industry standard overnight. The traditional Umbrella Corporation was gone. It was replaced by a massive focus on high-octane global bioterrorism conflicts against shady entities like Tricell and Neo Umbrella. The settings shifted dramatically, too, moving away from isolated mansions to places like rural Spain, Kijuju in Africa, and Edonia in China. By the time we got to Resident Evil 5 and 6, the series heavily incorporated cooperative gameplay, leaning deeply, deeply into blockbuster action.
Which brings us to Part 3, Rebirth and New Terror.
But, trends are cyclical. After the action formula peaked with Resident Evil 6, which to be fair had enthusiastic sales but highly mixed reviews from the core fans, the franchise reached a major crossroads. Capcom made the incredibly bold decision to strip away the massive explosions, the globe-trotting mercenaries, and the co-op elements and return to pure, unadulterated fear. Producer Masachika Kawada stated it perfectly back in 2013. The series will once again focus on survival horror with fewer action elements. This conscious design pivot was the exact catalyst for the massively successful Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. They realized that true horror required vulnerability. They absolutely needed to strip the player of their immense power to make the monsters terrifying again. Shifting to the first-person perspective completely isolated the player in terrifying new ways. You weren't a highly trained super cop doing backflips anymore. You were Ethan Winters, just an ordinary guy searching for his missing wife Mia, trapped in a derelict Louisiana plantation with the immortal, highly infected Baker family. This era doubled down hard on psychological horror. It later evolved into Resident Evil Village, pitting Ethan against a mysterious, snowy European village controlled by Mother Miranda. And by adding fully integrated virtual reality support, wow, the horror became more visceral and personal than it had ever been before. And this relentless innovation brings us right up to the spectacular 2026 release, marking the epic 30th anniversary of the franchise, Resident Evil Requiem. The lore here is incredibly rich. Grace Ashcroft, an FBI technical analyst investigating the Wrenwood Hotel, gets abducted by Victor Gideon, a former Umbrella researcher. The narrative brings everything full circle, dragging the legendary Leon S. Kennedy back into the fray to save Grace and find a cure for himself and Sherry. And inevitably, as you might guess, this journey leads them right back to where all the nightmares originally began, the terrifying ruins of Raccoon City. Now let's look at Part 4, the expanded universe. Zooming out from the mainline numbered games for a second, the lore's extreme adaptability allowed Resident Evil to break completely out of the gaming console. It dominates multiple forms of media now. It is a true transmedia empire. If we organize this massive list, you can see the 6 live-action movies directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Now, they deviate wildly from the game's established canon, but they somehow remain the most commercially successful film series based on a video game ever. Crazy, right? Meanwhile, CGI films like Degeneration and Death Island, alongside the Netflix series Infinite Darkness, are strictly canon and expand the direct lore of beloved characters like Leon and Claire. And then, of course, there's the ongoing reboot series aiming for deeper fidelity to the original horror roots, with Zach Krager's highly anticipated film slated for later in 2026.
But even within gaming itself, the expanded universe thrived through some really strategic spin-offs. For instance, the Outbreak series on the PlayStation 2 actually pioneered online cooperative horror way back in 2003. That was way before it was an industry standard. The Revelation series brilliantly stepped in to fill vital narrative gaps between the major action titles, bringing characters like Jill Valentine back to their claustrophobic horror roots on a creepy, deserted cruise ship. And the Chronicles series? That retold the classic lore through an entirely different lens as fast-paced on-rails shooters.
Let's wrap things up with Part 5, a monstrous success.
All of this creative risk-taking, the genre shifting, expanding into new media, it all leads us to the hard financial data that absolutely validates Capcom's strategy over the last 30 years. The numbers simply do not lie. So the crucial point here is that the modern focus on terrifying remakes and first-person horror actually produced the highest-selling individual titles in Capcom's entire history. The ground-up remake of Resident Evil 2 alone has moved 18.3 million units. Resident Evil 7 sits right behind it at 17.4 million, with Village at 14.9 million. Stripping away the action and returning to pure, suffocating horror was literally the most lucrative decision the company ever made.
These staggering numbers have officially ushered in what we can call the golden age of remakes. By rebuilding classic titles like Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 from the ground up using incredibly powerful modern engines, Capcom successfully introduced iconic characters like Leon, Claire, and Jill to a completely new generation of players, all while perfectly satisfying the deep nostalgia of longtime veterans. And the momentum isn't stopping anytime soon. We've got the huge 2026 announcement that a remake of Code Veronica, simply titled Resident Evil Veronica, will officially launch in 2027.
And that brings us to the ultimate question as we wrap up this explainer. With Resident Evil Requiem bringing the lore full circle back to the ruins of Raccoon City, and the upcoming Veronica remake poised to revive an absolute fan favorite, what new nightmares await us? How will Capcom continue to innovate, adapt, and absolutely terrify us next? Thank you so much for exploring the evolution of fear with me today. Keep your eyes on the shadows, and I'll catch you next time.